All right, let me start off by saying if you are someone that likes to come in and look at what I'm doing, I believe you are unable to look at my actual terminals. We're going to be working just with terminals for the first 10 to 15 minutes. Does anyone need more time logging in? Sweets. If you are someone who has historically not used C9, today is definitely a day you want to use it. You're going to have to do some installing. I know none of these laptops will come with SQLite installed by default. I should say it's unlikely. All right, so to start off with, I'm going to make a new folder in here, mkdir. Right, you can also right-click and make a new folder, but I'm just going to recap the specific commands. Patrick, you need to stop going in and coming out. Just pick one. So mkdir. I'm going to call it SQLite code. Great. You can see on the left over here it should show up. SQLite code, right? I'm going to cd into that. So cd into SQLite code, right? You can see I'm now in that directory. mkdir space SQLite. Yep. So just to recap some of the basic commands that I use on terminal. You guys good? Sure. You guys good? Alex and Jeff? Yeah. Cool. So, some of the basic commands that I use. cd is change directory, thank you. We have mkdir, that is make directory. We have touch, which we'll get to in a second here. And ls is basically going to view your entire directory. Now, right now, I'm inside of my SQLite code directory. So, ls isn't really going to do anything because, well, it'll do something. It'll view the directory, but there's nothing in there. And then finally, clear basically clears the screen. Okay. Now, in terms of running SQLite from command line, the command is sqli. If you just hit tab, it'll autofill to SQLite3. Right now, we don't want to hit enter yet. We need to actually specify the name of our database. So we're just going to be calling it day1 database. Maybe day1 test. And then .db is the file extension. You'll note that you don't actually have to make it a .db file. This is simply a recommended file extension here. So, as it says right here, enter .help for instructions, and then enter SQL statements terminated with a semicolon. All right, now, just to recap, kind of coming from our demo, right, back over here, we have our nice table, right? We have some records in there. We are going to be making a table. We've already made the database, so we need to actually make the table. And if we real quick Google our way through this, I know, J-Day basketball, highly important. We're the 27 or 28 seed or something. Anyways, we are going to look up create table SQL. You'll note that I did not need to Google specifically SQLite, right? SQL, we're basically running SQL commands. So this guy right here, we can look at tutorials point. That's perfectly reasonable. I'm going to look at W3 schools. But the tutorials point, I think, is also a good starter kit for learning SQL. So right here, the SQL create table statement. The create table statement is used to create a new table in the database that looks promising. And you can see basically what the syntax is create table, the name of our table, open parentheses, and then we basically put in all of our columns separated by commas. So let's actually make a table here. Create table. I'm going to call it students. I'm going to be capitalizing some things, and this is more of a standard. You don't actually have to capitalize them. It will actually work without that. That being said, typically the SQL keywords get capitalized. So I'm going to create a table called students. We'll collect 2 pieces of data. We'll do name, and that'll be a varchar. Whoops, not comma. Name, varchar. And how this works is basically, it's just a string, right, varchar, and you specify the number of characters that it can be. So it's going to be 255. It's a pretty standard amount there. And then I'm also going to add, I don't know, grade, and that'll be an int. Great. So don't forget your semicolon right here. You hit enter, and voila, it worked. And by it worked, I mean it didn't crash, right? Which hopefully means it works. Now, there's a couple of nice little commands here. If we run our .help command, you can kind of see there are a bunch of suggested commands that we could run. The one we're going to run in a second here is this .tables. You can see we've got .show, right? Show the current values. That's kind of interesting. We have .schema. This is basically show the create statement, so we can actually view what we did to create our table. You can see things like read, .quit. We're going to run this eventually, but not yet because we're not ready to quit yet. Alright, there's a bunch of stuff in here that's probably relatively helpful. That being said, what I would typically recommend is Google your way through statements. These are more specific commands that are for SQLite as opposed to SQL in general. So as I said, going back to this nice slide here, SQLite is basically an implementation of SQL. All of the commands that start with a dot are the SQLite commands. All the things like create and all of that are basically standard SQL commands. So we've successfully created our table, hopefully. If we run a .tables, you can see we have one table here, right? It's students. And if we run a .schema students, you can see here is our nice command we use to actually create our table. All right, so we've successfully created a table. How many people have successfully gotten to this point? Great. Does anyone need help getting to this point? Cool. All right, we're going to add some data. This is the insert into command. Insert into students. Let's quickly Google our nice little reference for this. Insert into command SQL. Right, remember, I'm a weak student. I don't know anything. I need to Google my way through everything, which is fine. Right, SQL insert into statement. So the insert into statement is used to insert new records into a table, right, which is exactly what we want. Insert into syntax, there's kind of 2 typical ways to do this. One is like this, where we specify all of our column names, right? That will work. We're going to try that. The other one is we don't specify our column names, in which case it automatically goes in order of the way we created our table. So for our table, we used name and grade. So let's try just the one without the without specifying. So the second one here. So it'll be insert into students. I'm trying to make this slightly bigger. Insert into students values, and we'll put in Jerry, and he is in 11th grade, right? Now, a standard error you may run into is if you hit enter right here, you can see nothing happened, and we still have this nice little ... thing over here. Does anyone know what happened or have any guesses? Yep, forgot my semicolon, right? The good news is the statement is going to continue here. So I'm just going to stick my semicolon there, and boom, boom. It didn't crash, which means that Jerry is hopefully in our database, right? So if we add somebody else, inserts into students, and we're going to try the other way of doing things, right? So it's this top one up here, insert into. You can specify your column names and then your values. So maybe I forgot the order of my stuff, right? So I'm going to say, oh, I think I did grade first. And then name, right? Values. And so my grade is going to be 12. And my value is Lauren. right? And again, my semicolon, and voila. Again, it didn't crash, which hopefully means that it worked, right? Now, at this point, you're probably wondering how the heck do we actually test if it worked? Well, hopefully it worked, but we can certainly check that. I have yet to actually use this nice little way of doing things, so I might as well try this out. If we call, shoot, what was it? How did we figure out the data? Trace. Shoot, does anyone remember what the command was? Show, dot show, thank you. So let's run a dot show students. I don't know, I have no idea what this is going to do. I've never done this before. Oh, let's see, dot show. No, this is actually garbage. We're not going to do this. Never mind, sorry. We're going to run a typical select statements. Select is basically how you query your database. And again, let's just look this up. Select SQL, right, just so we can get all of our references in here. And you can see, here's Wikipedia. We're going to look at W3 schools. Whoops. The select statement is used to select data from a database. Right, the data is returned in a result table called the result set. So you'll note that it actually returns a table of its own. And we're going to talk about how to actually specifically query data, query specific data. We'll get there. But for now, we're just going to run a basic select. So we'll do select, you can select column names, right? So we could do name, grade, from students, right? And you can see, voila, it worked. If we flip these around, we could run select grade, comma, name, from students, and that'll switch the order. And finally, the easiest, and I would say my typical, most commonly used debugging select statement is select star from students. And star is just a wildcard. Basically what that does is it just selects everything. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, this seems silly, Mr. Rudwick, why are we doing this? Why, how do we only get specific things? Well, it turns out there's some ways to modify our select statements. So there's a select where, select star from students, where. So here, basically how this works is you can select specific columns from your table, and you can basically pass in arguments here. So for example, where, I think we need parentheses. I don't actually remember the syntax for this. Select SQL where, selects where command. Let's see, it'll tell us, don't worry. So again, the where clause, right? So this where condition, right here, where, for example, something like this, right? So select from customers where country equals this. So for example, we can do where grade is greater than or equal to 12, right? And you can see it should just give us Lauren, which it does, right? Now, in terms of the syntax here, I would say Google your way through it, guess and check, but generally speaking, it is typical Boolean logic. So this kind of concludes our first intro just using command line. What questions do you guys have so far? All right, the most important part of this, how do we actually quit our database? Because we're tired of SQL, right? It is the .quit command. You'll note that Command C or Control C does not work, right? The only way to quit is with the .quit command. Now, if we run an ls at this point, you can see we have our day one database here. It does indeed live in our folder. If we bring this over and actually open up this folder, you can see there is a file in here, and you can actually open it, right? It's got all this stuff in here. There's basically a bunch of garbage. All these red little dots are basically characters that the C9 editor cannot recognize. That's fine. As it says right here, SQL format 3, right? So this is this SQL3 file. Generally speaking, I don't typically open these because the idea is that you're interacting with it with the SQL program, right? This would be like trying to open up a Word document from command line. Has anyone ever tried this? No. Give it a shot sometime. It's going to look like this. Anyways, moral of the story. So we have successfully created a database. Now we need to actually add some actual code, right? Not just creating a database from command line, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to make a web page where we can interact with this guy. So we're going to make a basic app. This is probably going to take about 15-ish more minutes, something like that. So we're going to make some files here. We're going to make our index.js. We're going to make our index.html. Let's see, we'll call it form.html. When I say make, remember the touch command will make new files, right? And then on the left, they automatically show up. You can also absolutely right-click and do new file at the bottom. That will work just fine as well. All right, so I'm going to open up these two new files that I just made. And I'm going to try to fix my zoom stuff so you guys can actually see. Does this seem reasonable? Bigger? Can I get some feedback on sizing? Bigger? Is that good? Cool. Alright, so we got our index.js. Basically, we are going to be making a node server, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to make an HTML form over here. We've never actually talked about HTML forms. Some of you have used them by accident to not a lot of success typically, and that's because you didn't exactly know how they worked. If you know how they work, awesome. Generally speaking, I would say most stuff that we've done in this class doesn't really make it very helpful. But today we're going to talk about them, at least just so you are exposed to them at some point. So on our index.js, we're going to make a basic node server. So we'll have var, oh, we need to install something first, which I forgot to do. If we go back to our bash over here, this nice npm package right here, sql3, this is the package we're going to be using. You can see on the right, we've got, for example, 10,000 downloads in the last day, right? That's not that many, but it's a pretty good amount. This means it's a pretty big user base. For example, if we go to like, I don't know, Express, I think they're at like 1 million downloads, 500,000 downloads, so pretty good amount, right? So ours is still like a reasonable size though, right? 10,000. So this is a perfectly popular enough, and by that I mean relatively well supported, hopefully considering its user base, library. So we're going to install this guy right here, this sql3, and remember the command to do that. npm install, right? So it's going to be npm install sqlite3, right? And that should install into our node modules folder right here. So when we're done, this should work. And I already installed mine yesterday, but yeah. So we've installed our nice little server here. Before we actually write our entire program, we are going to connect up to our database just to make sure it actually works. So if we go to this nice page here, if you just Google npm sqlite, should be the first one, I think. This guy right here, sqlite3. So it's this page here, right? I'm just going to go back to my other tab. But it's the npm sqlite3 page. So you can see there's some supported platforms, in particular node.js, which is what we will be using, right? They're talking about some stuff in here. Really what I typically do is I try to get this to work first and then kind of figure out all of the back-end details later. So I kind of like hack it together, which is exactly what we're going to be doing right now. So we import SQL, we open up a database, then we basically run some queries. Now what this serialize command does is that basically sets it up so that our everything runs at the same time. We're actually going to be skipping that step today, but that basically sets it up so that all of our queries run at once. We're going to be ignoring that. So start off with, we need to import, so it'll be var sqlite3 equals require sqlite3. Great, that's line number 1. The second one, we need to actually build our database. Now this colon memory thing, that's not how we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing... Sorry?
What is dot verbose?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't actually know, but we're going to put it in. Feel free to Google that and tell me. So we're making our database, right? So we need to basically instantiate a new database. Now what goes in here is our actual database that we created. So it'll be var db is equal to new sqlite3 dot, what was it, dot database, and ours was called, what's, day1 dot db or something? Day1 test dot db. Great. So again, this first line we basically just import. In the second line we instantiate this object so we can actually interact with our database. Now from here it actually only takes a couple more commands to do what we want to do, right? We can run specific commands here. In particular, what we want to do is we want to run this guy, right? We want to be able to select stuff from our database. So it's going to be this db.each. There are other ways of doing this. You can actually query an entire string, but what this .each command is going to do is it's going to for each loop over what gets returned. So we're basically going to run a select command and then have a callback function here. And so this callback function is going to execute for each row that gets returned. So we'll have var, what was it? db.each. And again, we pass in our query, and then we pass in our callback function. So for our query, we'll just do select star from students. And then this callback function, as you can see, we're basically running, we're taking in 2 arguments, right? We're taking in an error, and we're taking in a row. So we'll have if not error. Basically, if our code was successful, we'll just do console.log row. So we got a fully functional program that is not a server. However, it is a perfectly reasonable node program. So all we're doing is we're just running a basic select, looping over the results, printing them out in our console. In terms of how we run this, we can click run at the top. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run it through bash over here. I don't know how to zoom. Does anyone know how to zoom in on my terminal in C9? No. Great. Well, the command is going to be node and then the name of my file, which is index.js. Index.js. And you can see, voila, we printed out both Lauren and Jerry, right? And we got these nice curly braces. What is that for? JSON, right? So we got a JSON object, right? We don't have to do any weird typing type stuff. It automatically gives us exactly the file type that we want. So for example, if instead of just console.logging row, if we wanted to do something like console.log, maybe, I don't know, row.name is in grade, row.grade, right? This will work just fine, right? Because again, with our keys, no problem, right? We run this guy, and you can see Jerry is in grade 11, Lauren is in grade 12, voila, no problems. So, as you can see here, we certainly are able to connect to our database. Now, where we're going here is basically we are going to actually build a client that our user can interact with. We're going to send requests to our server over here. We're going to take our server, we're going to talk to our database. Our database is going to send the data back to the server, and then we'll maybe send it back to the client. So in terms of how that looks in our nice little overview stuff, we've got clients, right? So they'll send data, node, server, talk to database, right? And then give results back, and then take these guys and display here. Something like that. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're basically going to take the user inputted data, add it to our database, and then maybe spit everything else back out. So, in terms of how this is going to go, we're going to basically make a typical Express type server. We don't really need sockets, but we are going to need Express, so we can basically redirect them over here to our form. We're actually going to build our form first, though. So, we got HTML, head, body, right? All I did was just make a basic HTML file. It's called form.html. Inside my head, I actually really don't need anything in here. Head stuff. CSS maybe. Inside of our body, I'm going to build a form element. Now, if you type in form and hit tab and C9, whoa, and hit tab, it's going to autofill some stuff. And this is actually good stuff. I would say typically the stuff that C9 will auto-populate as far as HTML elements go is not great, but this one I actually think is pretty reasonable. So, generally speaking, we have a name, and then we have this submit button right here. So I'm actually going to make another element over here. So this first one is going to be name, and the second one is going to be grade, right? Because that's basically the data that we're going to be collecting. So we're basically going to allow it so that people can submit more data to our page here. I'm going to put these guys in a div tag. Sorry? Should you change the type for grade? No. Oh, that's a good question. Ben was asking, should we change the type for grade? Probably. It should be a number. Thank you. Good catch. And then again, same idea here. Make a div tag for these. So we'll have let's see, name, grade. Right, you can kind of see where we're going here. Maybe we want to take these div tags and format them somehow using CSS. I'm going to skip that step for now. So basically we got a way to collect stuff. Now, for this form element, how many people have attempted and had issues with forms before in this class already? Don't be shy. Yep. Yep. It's perfectly reasonable. If you're not raising your hand, you either did not Google the same stuff that these people did, or you are, I don't know, maybe you figured it out. That's certainly possible. But generally speaking, what a form does, HTML form, it's a typical element just like when you go to the doctor's office and you fill out a form, right? It's an actual form. Now this one is a digital form, but same idea. You try to collect some data, and then you basically send it somewhere, right? Now, there's kind of two different attributes that are important here. I'm going to add a comment up here. Important attributes. There's kind of two important ones. One is action, and one is name. So action, where to send data, and our name is basically all of the data to be sent. Okay? Now there are actually other things. For example, we could specify the type of request. We could have them do a get versus a post. Can somebody remind me when we use get requests in this class? Oh, buddy. Ajax. I heard the keyword, right? Ajax, we send requests. Certainly we could use Ajax here. I just want to at least have you guys be familiar with the concept of a form. That's why we're doing it this way today. So I think this is our form. Oh, we need to, well, we're going to leave it here for now, and we'll go back and change it in a little bit. So going back to our server, we need to add some stuff. In particular, we need to add all of the things we need to actually set up a server, right? So we have var express is equal to require express var app is equal to express, right? I think I'm doing this right. And then we have var http is equal to require http dot server app. I think I've done this right. This is our typical import statements to actually start an Express server, right? And just a reminder, Express is basically our controller on our server side. It takes our requests and decides where to send users, right? And it can actually take in data with that as well. So far the bottom half of our code here, the bottom half of our code here is for SQL. The top half is for our server. Now we need to do a couple other things up here. We're going to add our receive requests, and then we also need to start our server. So for this receive requests, basically what we're going to do is we're just going to do an app.get. I think that's right. And this is the slash, right? Again, what this does is this decides where to send people. So on slash, this is basically our home directory. And I know we've done all of this before, but hopefully some of this can sink in after kind of multiple discussions about it. So for the slash, we are going to call a function. We have request and response. Right now, typically what we've done is we've just done a send file, which is actually exactly what we're going to do here. So we'll do response.send file, and we're just going to send them to form.html. So again, all we're doing is when somebody goes to our server, right after we run it, if they go to the home directory, we basically just send them to our HTML form. And then we need to actually start our server, and this is the http dot I don't remember. Does anyone remember the command? Is it listen or start server or something? Sorry? Listen. http.listen. So we got a port, a host, and a callback. The port is oh man, I'm like blanking on a couple of these. What was it? Thank you. Process.env.port, process.env.ip, and then our callback function. And I will just stick one in here that basically console.logs the server has started, right? So I'm just going to kind of recap everything we've done here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So we've got a perfectly reasonable SQL server. We've got some imports up here. We've got receive requests and redirect them where we want them to go. We've got starting our server. Then at the bottom here, this is basically all of our SQL code. Now right now all that's doing is it's just running right when we start our server. Right? We're going to change that in a little bit, but for now I'm just going to leave it there and not worry about it. So let's run this guy and then we'll take questions and pause for a little bit. So we make sure to run your index.js. You can see the server has started. Jerry is in grade 11. Lauren is in grade 12, right? This is all expected because this is just logging to the console when we click play. If we open up this file, oh, this is awkward. The path must specify. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Thank you, Chris. Forgot my path, my dir name. Right, it's going to be res.sendFile __ dir name plus slash. Right, I forgot to actually send him to the right spot. That's important. All right, take two. All right, we go back, we refresh. Boom, boom. We've got this nice, semi-hideous, but perfectly reasonable HTML page, right? If we inspect over here, right, F12 or Control-Shift-I, I'm just going to go to the elements over here. Now this shadow root, you don't need to worry about that. But the body over here, remember this is my form, right? So my form's really got a couple of elements here. It's got these two sweet div tags that basically have inputs in them. And then we also have this submit over here, right? Input type equals submit. Now, the reason why this is kind of interesting is basically HTML does a lot of stuff by default for you, assuming, well, not assuming anything. That's basically just how it works. That's how a browser works. So what a form does is going to automatically submit somewhere every single thing that has a name. Now, right now, we have two things that have names, right? We have this guy, which has the name, and then we have this guy, which has the name grade, right? So we're going to put in something. We'll add Sid, and he's in grade 11, right? We click Submit, and you can see, for all intents and purposes, it looks like all that happened was our page refreshed. Does anyone know what actually happened? Or maybe where we should look for changes?
You send a request to the server with an action / and then that, because you had it on get / it just refreshed.
So it basically took all that stuff, it sent it to the server. The server knows what to do, and when I say it sent it to the server, it actually sent it to the same URL, because by default it submits to itself. So it sent it to the same URL. And as far as where all that data went, if we look at the top up here, it's actually right here in the URL, right? So we got name equals Sid, grade equals 11. That happens by default for an HTML form, right?
Very helpful.
Now you'll note that it looks like the page refreshed, but it did not refresh, right? It actually submitted to itself. If we go back, we can get back to our old data, right? If we go back and forward, we can get back to our old data. So what we need to do here is we need to actually change that action so we can submit it. Instead of to itself, we can submit it to the actual, like somewhere else, right? So what we're going to do over here is we're basically going to be listening for a new location, and we're going to change our HTML file to submit somewhere else. So let's actually make those nice little changes over here. So we have app.get/. We're going to add another one in here. So we'll have app.get receive data. And again, we'll call a function. And this is again rec and res. So this receive data thing, this is going to be where we're actually going to be sending our stuff. Now, this will be the first time ever we're using this other argument, this req guy. Remember this request, right? This is the request that we are receiving to the server. This guy actually has some stuff in it. We've never really dealt with that before. But the important part is, I believe, oh man, I don't remember. Let's just console.log and figure it out. We'll do a console.log rec. We can kind of debug from here. So we changed that. We also need to change on our HTML page. We need to add this action thing that I talked about that we haven't actually added yet. So this is an attribute on our form. So we'll have action is equal to, what did I call it? Receive data. Right? So all this is going to do is this is going to redirect, instead of submitting to itself, it's going to submit to this spot over here. Right? So two changes. So we got to change our action and then also change our server so we can actually handle this stuff. So we click run again, and again we go back to our page. Here we go. All right, we submit Sid again. Maybe I'll change it up. I'll submit Rachel, grade 12. right? We click submit. You can see nothing happened, right? It's actually currently hanging. However, on our server side, something did happen, right? So we got this giant JSON. This is our request object. Right? There's a bunch of stuff in here. And I think the one we're looking for, we're actually looking for the keyword Rachel. I think it's called like query or something. Here we go. .query. So inside this giant JSON we have this query. Now here's a question. Does anyone know why this is not loading anything and it's still hanging? What I'd like you to do, please talk to your neighbor for about 30 seconds. Try to think, why is this thing hanging? And I will give you a hint. It is on the screen right now. All right, let's bring it back in. Anyesha, any ideas?
You've written something for a request, but you haven't actually given a response yet.
Absolutely, right? We have this nice response variable. We need to actually do something with this guy, right? So when they went to the home page, we gave them this file. So I'm just going to add a nice little like ending thing over here. It's going to be res.end, not send, end. And basically this ends the message that we're sending back. We're just going to say like your data has been received. All right, seems like a reasonable message. Now, remember the query, the .query is the thing we care about. So if we change this to .query, now this seems like a better server over here. So we're going to rerun this guy. I'm going to go back to my HTML. You'll note that I actually can go back and I don't need to refresh this. And the reason I don't need to refresh is because my HTML has not changed, right? The server is going to deal with it differently, but the client side is completely the same. So for all intents and purposes, that's not a problem. So I click submit again, and you can see it gives me my nice your data has been received. On the server, we have this nice name, Rachel, grade 12, right? So a couple of other nifty little things we can do. Each time we go to this URL, it is going to send the exact same thing. So, for example, if we refresh like 10 times, you can see on the server over here we have a bunch of requests, right? Every single time we refresh, it's resending the data. All right, we can also go up in the URL and change this to, instead of Rachel, we can change it to Alex, right? And you can see at the bottom, we got this new data down here, right? Yes, sir.
So mine says that you can't get the received data, like the slash received data.
Cool. We're gonna pause in about 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute. If you could just give me a second here. So, in terms of our goal here, we want to take this request thing that our client sent us, and we want to basically add it to our database. I'm gonna have you guys Google it, but it is, well, it's basically going back to this nice little general overview here, right? You can kind of see how they added data. So we want to be able to add data, and then we also, in an ideal world, can send stuff back, the actual current state of our database. So instead of just sending this, we want to take the request and add to database, and then also send all of our data back to the clients, right? Instead, yeah. So at this point, this kind of concludes our demo for the day. This is kind of our challenge for the rest of today. We have about 45 minutes. What I would like you to do, at least for the next 20 minutes, please work with your neighbor. Then if you are still have outstanding stuff on your Socket Lab, feel free to go back to that then. But for now, I would like you to try to take up this challenge. if you finish that, what I would like you to do is potentially add something to save, be it a new page or potentially some stuff on your Socket Lab. But this is kind of the challenge for the next 20 minutes here. What questions do you have about what the goal is? Yes, sir. I think it's not a short period today. Dang it. Well, all right, fine. We got a half hour. Either way, the next 20 minutes we're going to be working on this, and then we'll kind of check in after that. Feel free to work with your neighbor. If you want a basic hint, all of this stuff is going to need to go inside of here, right? So we're going to need to open up our database and actually send our request in there. So at this point, I'm going to come around and help people that are kind of not at this point. You have a question or you need help? Cool. I'm going to answer Jack's question first. So you want to see probably or maybe sqlite code. Probably sqlite code. You can run this. That would also work. What are you trying to do? Let's make this simple. You just run the node server, does it work without any client stuff? So just this, or we add SQL, and then we
like how often does that happen? Like I want to have I've seen it before, but I've never. I know that's pretty weird. Just like I can't often say like, oh, I didn't mean to friend you. Like just like, no, it doesn't send out a message. But I don't have a
there's nothing in here.
Have I already been friended?
So this day one DBs in the wrong folder.
How often does it say it takes 100%?
You had two different day one DB files. You had one in your outer directory, and you had one in this folder. And the one you were trying to query was
I'm not sure.
Transaction. And then you have tx.execute SQL, and then you can put the actual SQL and create.
It's kind of complicated. Are you sure that? It's kind of like
I mean,
Java's good.
Are you like actually
you have to figure out like how to put it in JavaScript.
Stack Overflow. Oh. Reliable will be.